So we want to make sure that for the teacher educators who came here to talk about teacher education, we make sure that we have as broad a range of questions as possible. We also have a good amount of time for questions. We really want today to be a dialogue, which is why we're ending with an hour-long, what we're calling town hall meeting, which is direct engagement with each other. We also have Everett Lounge across the hallway there, open, reserved for us for lunch, so that people can meet each other and talk with all of us. So today is all about dialogue, and we believe we're smarter together. Maybe I should say wiser together. We're more effective, or more, all these loaded words, right? We do better work for children, and I think one of the things that everyone in this audience, I can assume, has in common is our deep and abiding interest and commitment to children, to all children. You know, I was sitting there watching, I'm kind of talking while you get time to fill in forms, and then Sarah's gonna read some of the questions with that microphone right there after you turn it on. I was watching the Dick and Jane and realizing all of a sudden, like, oh my goodness, I didn't know how to read when I got to first grade. And that was my reading book. But I also noticed how white those pictures are, and how an important part of the conversation we haven't entered into yet today is to think about who the readers are and what the texts are that they're reading, and that directly relates to motivation. If you don't see yourself in the story, if you're not part of the story, why would you even want to engage with that story? So I think that's another piece I'm counting on the audience to really bring in here today too in conversation. Sarah?
Okay.
If you want to sit up front.
All right.
I think this works. The microphone is working,
I
right?
think I'm going to turn off the pendulum. Is it driving everybody else crazy?
So the first two questions are, I think, related to the last question that you posed, right, which had to do with the pendulum, and they're kind of politically related. I might frame them as asking, you said, how do we slow the pendulum? The first question there is, who's the we, right? And then your thoughts on that particular question.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Who's the we? Well, I guess it's the we who need to influence the them who are pushing the pendulum out farther and farther. Let me just say that my perhaps naive assumption here is that everybody thinks they're doing good for kids, right? I don't think anybody's trying to hurt the kids. I don't think the legislators who are behind this legislation are trying to undermine reading outcomes. I think they're just a little overly optimistic about their own expertise in how to improve things. And I think, and then there are justifiably agitated parents. I mean, parents who are who know that their own kids are not getting good reading instruction, because of course there are some poor teachers out there. There are some school districts that have selected curricula that don't support particularly new teachers or inexperienced teachers optimally in teaching literacy. We don't want to blind ourselves to that. But so I think the we is, first of all, everybody engaged in this discourse, but secondly, people who are teacher educators to begin with, and teacher educators faced with this very severe challenge in American education that you don't exactly know where a kid is going to, one of your students is going to be teaching, so you don't know exactly how to provide guidance in a rational way, because the rational guidance would be, okay, you're going to have this curriculum. Let's think about how we make that curriculum effective for all of the kids in your class. But you don't know what the curriculum is going to be because the students are going to be taking jobs everywhere. It's a completely insane educational system, in other words, and one that poses a lot of challenges that say, much more centralized systems that have inspectorates and supports, universalized supports to teaching, don't face. And federal funding, and yeah, so we have to figure out how to give our students who are going into classrooms, either as teachers or, in my case, much more likely as curriculum consultants or principals or coaches, how to give them the knowledge and the wisdom to support the full array of teachers that they will be working with.
Thank you. There are also several questions on reading at the secondary level. So your thoughts on preparing teachers to teach reading at the secondary level after 5th grade, one of the questions, right?
Yeah.
So kind of next steps.
Well, this is something where I will say teacher education programs are severely challenged. That I mean, these are actually the students I teach at Harvard. These are people who come. Many have been in schools teaching. They tend to be secondary. They tend to be 4th grade and above teachers, and most of them do say they've never had a course in how to deal with reading in the discipline they're teaching. And they are thus actually much more puzzled by how to go about it. And then they go to get support from the people in their buildings who had reading instruction. Those are the 1st and 2nd grade, were educated with some attention to reading instruction. And the advice they get isn't very good for 6th graders, because 6th graders don't really want to read the 2023 equivalent of Dick and Jane, right? They want to read about things that they're interested in, but they need the support to do the word attack in some cases, the fluency in some cases, to understand the language in some cases. So that's a very big problem. And actually, I will in 1998, when the Preventing Reading Difficulties report came out, just as it was, the day that we had a press conference about it, I sat down and wrote a memo to the Department of Education, which I'm sure got lost, saying, this isn't, even if we solved the problem of 3rd grade reading, we won't have solved the problem of reading. American kids aren't actually failing that badly at 3rd or 4th grade reading. In international comparisons, they do relatively well. It's at 8th grade and 10th grade reading that they do really badly. That's where we're going to need a lot of attention. And the country at that time was operating with this inoculation model. Oh, you can't read in 10th grade because you weren't taught to read properly in 1st grade. But in fact, a lot of kids who come out of 3rd grade reading perfectly well still struggle very badly in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade because the tasks change, and because the instructional support is often no longer there. So I think that's a huge problem, and I don't know what to do about it without completely renovating teacher education programs.
That's why we're here.
Several questions also touch on your thoughts on the kind of research that you mentioned as being necessary. So that includes what different areas would be included if we were actually to research the science of teaching reading. What disciplines might that include?
Well, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about this, but I think, at a bare minimum, various people are making claims about how reading is taught, and what good things and bad things are going on. And we don't actually know, we don't have a census of reading instruction. So some sort of national effort to figure out how reading is taught, or what's going on in classrooms. And you could say, well, yeah, but we know what curricula are being purchased, but we don't know what anybody's doing with those curricula. I mean, the curricula do not teach kids to read. The curricula, under the best of circumstances, serve as supports to teachers to teach kids how to read, and they can get very well used in conditions where there's lots of professional development and support for using them, and they can get very badly used, and they can get put on the shelf and not used at all. Actually having some mechanism to know what's going on, and then of course to see how in the, let's say the 20% of classrooms where something is going on that looks really good, what the teachers are doing to ensure that that is being individualized to the full range of students in the class. Because if something is successful for 22 first graders, it isn't the same thing for all 22 first graders. And so we have to come to understand how it is that teachers manage to do that individualization.
Thank you. There are a few sort of concrete specific questions. One has to do with the importance, do you think it's important to teach teachers effective read-aloud techniques? What's the place of that in this whole conversation?
Oh gosh, in the old days when I was a legitimate developmental psychologist, I did a lot of work studying parent-child interaction and read-alouds and things like that. It was a much simpler world. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is some evidence that read-alouds are most effective when kids have the right to ask questions and respond, and when the books are of interest to them. But I don't think there's a way to do read-alouds really badly, except perhaps, oh, you know some? All right. Well, you could want to demonstrate? But the point of read-alouds is, of course, discussion and question and answer and engagement. And so I guess if it's not approached that way, it's suboptimal. But again, is that the most urgent thing we need to do? I don't know.
Okay, is there a most urgent thing we need to do?
Well, I think we need to stop vilifying each other, perhaps, is the most urgent thing we need to do.
All right, here's another kind of specific question. This person starts by saying, thank you for an enlightening presentation. I'd like to hear your thoughts and reflections on how this war affects teachers' teaching of children in a language literacy mismatch and other diverse populations globally.
So teaching second language speakers or teaching kids in English when they don't speak English?
Or when they speak an English that's not the one that's spoken in the school. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me bring in some data from the Netherlands, for example, where the evidence has been very clear that immigrant children or children of immigrants actually outperform Dutch children in reading scores at the end of grade 1, whether or not they spoke Dutch on arrival at first grade. Now you might find that very puzzling. Dutch happens to be an extremely shallow orthography. You can really learn it. You can learn to decode it without learning the language. And so these kids on end of first grade tests think that dibbles, can you read these words aloud correctly, faster? They do really well. But of course, in third grade, their comprehension scores are in the cellar because they've been taught to read really accurately and fluently, and they have not had adequate access to language support, to language development, or to access to the content knowledge that would support comprehension in third grade. The only difference in the US is that given how much more opaque the orthography of English is, by the end of first grade, the kids can't even read accurately and fluently, right? So the same, but they would be able to if it were a shallow orthography. That they still need the oral language urgently. I mean, much more urgently to decode and equally urgently to comprehend. So I have often told people who asked, although I haven't volunteered this because I've never done the study, but the best approach with second language speakers who arrive, say, at school with no oral language is to make sure they get to, say, 1,000 vocabulary words in English in their oral vocabulary before we start to teach them to read. This is not advice which is widely accepted or followed, but I think, I still think it's good advice. And interestingly, the most effective bilingual programs that have ever been launched in the US are ones where the kids are taught content in their native language and then that same content in English that same day, right? So paired programs. And those are the ones that have produced the most impressive positive effects for bilingual education. And that's the kind of program that's almost never implemented, almost never designed or implemented. So there's a lot of stuff we know. There is some science for that, and we ignore it.
Could you speak a little bit more about this question of motivation and text selection?
Yeah. Sure. Well, let's talk about dyslexics, for example, who, clearly benefit, perhaps are more dependent than other kids even on a rational introduction to the phoneme-grapheme relationships. But a former doctoral student at Harvard named Rosalie Fink wrote a book in which she interviewed 50 successful academics or professionals who were dyslexic and who continued to struggle with spelling, continued to struggle with speed of reading, showed the challenges that you might expect dyslexics would show, even as successful adults operating in a highly literate, with a lot of literacy demands on them. And they all reported that they figured out, they learned to read by getting interested in something. That something that was so compelling that they struggled through encyclopedia entries and information books, and they went to movies about that topic. I mean, they used oral input, but they also struggled with text and taught themselves, in effect, how to read better, but only for things that they were really interested in. And so, I mean, we've all met the 5-year-old who will only read books about dinosaurs. I actually sat next to one on a plane some time ago, and this kid had this huge book about dinosaurs, and so I said, "Oh wow, tell me what you know about dinosaurs." And 10 minutes later, I said, "Well, what do you think happened to them?" And his mother said, "Be careful. Do you really want to have this conversation? You're flying to Los Angeles with this kid. He will talk to you for 3 hours about dinosaurs," right? But so obsessions like that can be a route into literacy, and every book has in it words and letters, after all, which can be a source of instruction about phonics, but it's unlikely that any first grade teacher can actually use that, use every child's preferred topic as curricular content. So that would be great, but it's not going to happen. So we have to find topics that are of general interest. But the motivation piece is absolutely crucial. And it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be your obsession with dinosaurs. I mean, anything can be made interesting if it's relatively close to personal experience and a topic for discussion, a topic for interaction among kids, a topic where the kids have the autonomy to do some of the utilization of curiosity.
Utilization of curiosity. I want to thank you. Yeah. All right, questions are continuing to pour in happily, right? To return to older students, there are several questions about content areas and literacy. You've touched on that, but if you have more to say, there seems to be quite a bit of interest on the roles and responsibilities of teachers of, say, science or history with older children.
Well, or the roles and responsibilities of those of us who prepare those teachers.
Yes.
To alert them to the fact, to alert them to the range of challenges that their students will encounter in reading texts that they, as experts in the field, think are straightforward. And when you do that work, when you really sit down and chart out what are the words in this text that the student is likely to misinterpret because they're being used in a disciplinarily specific way rather than in a general way, or what are the syntactic constructions in this text, or what's the presupposed domains of knowledge in this text that students may not have. It's breathtaking that they can ever sit through they can never read through chapter 22 in the history textbook and get anything out of it. So I have actually worked with colleagues at SERP, which is a research practice partnership, to develop curriculum in science and in social studies for middle grades in which we did our damnedest to try to put into small chunks of curriculum the principles that I think that I and my colleagues in that design group think should organize curricular approaches in the disciplines for middle grade students. And those include, look up word generation, SoGen, SciGen. You will find all these materials. They're downloadable, they're free. They can be used in any classroom. They can be used in any teacher education program as an example of, every unit begins with a reader's theater that puts the topic of the unit into the words of age mates of the students. Every unit culminates with a debate that you can't participate in unless you've learned the content of the unit. The debates are about dilemmas. So the teacher does not have a privileged position in deciding what the right answer is, because they're not like, they're really open-ended questions. The readings are designed to be approachable at different levels for students with different, and to be read by students in groups so that they can help each other figure them out. I mean, so the idea is, you might really not want to read a unit about the Patriot Act, right, in civics. But if it starts with, our principal has decided to is worried about bullying in the schools and has decided to put video cameras in the bathrooms. Here's a group of 6th graders discussing this. what do you think? I don't want TV cameras in my bathroom. Yeah, but I got my purse stolen the other day. I want to know who stole it, right? I mean, kids have honest disagreements about things like this, which can model friendly disagreements about very important civic, historical, and scientific issues. And that is an effective motivating lead-in to acquiring more information. Well, what's the downside of universal CCTV? What's the advantages? In what society would they be most effective and less effective? I mean, it seems obvious to us as adults that we don't read everything, right? We only read things we're interested in. And yet, kids in school are expected to read what we tell them to read, and more work up front to help them understand why they should be interested, I think, is the responsibility of the teacher, and in turn the responsibility of the educator of that teacher, and the curricular supports that are offered.
So to go to the educator of that teacher, I'm struck by the brilliant thoughts that you're giving us on what it is to teach reading at multiple levels. But you also then talked about the realities of preparing teachers to be in a school, and as teacher educators, we don't know what that school is going to be. And so there are a few questions here that have to do with things like the role of the principal, local change within schools. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to frame that kind of question in terms of the work that we do as teacher educators to prepare our teachers to teach reading, but also to navigate the world of teaching reading right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, in an ideal world, we would have teacher educators, we would have future teachers in classes with future principals, right? We would have future principals in classes with future superintendents. We would have a more integrated system and establish cross-role relationships. But I mean, I don't have a brilliant answer to that. I mean, I think everybody knows where the problems lie and where the challenges lie. I will say this: many years ago, when we were first launching this word generation curriculum in many different school districts, we would have institutes, groups for different districts, and it was the districts where the superintendents and the principals came that implemented the program and kept the program going. And the districts where the teachers came and loved it, but didn't have the power to keep it going, were the ones where it died after a year or two. So, I mean, maybe the suggestion is don't even bother unless you've got buy-in from leadership. And enough buy-in from leadership that they're willing to learn how it works, for that matter.
So we have about 10 more minutes. If there are more questions, please feel free to add them to the chart, and we'll work our way through. Is there there are a few more, but I just want to, yeah. What about the place of assessments and level texts? Yeah. Yeah.
Assessments and leveled texts.
Big one, I know. And any way that you would like to
Fritz, you want to
jump into that one?
Well, I mean, well, first let me begin with leveled texts. Leveled texts, kids do need to practice, right? They need they need the opportunity not just to grasp, but also to master the alphabetic principle. And mastering the alphabetic principle means seeing words and spelling patterns many, many times, so that you are not, in fact, doing a kind of a left to right, letter by letter figuring it out, decoding process with those words. So, you know, leveled texts or texts that give that practice. It would be nice if they were charming texts. It would be nice if they were engaging texts. It would be nice if they were texts that had some authentic outcome, which isn't all that hard, right? That like a question to answer at the end that meant you actually had to process the text, or a puzzle to work out. I think it's clear that kids need practice, and that one of the challenges of many, Freddie Hebert would argue that many of the current reading curricula push kids through too fast and impede fluency by not giving them enough automatization practice. It's not my area of expertise. I haven't studied this in great depth to know like how many encounters with the TION ending do you need to have had before you don't try to read it as tion. But there is room for that. I don't think we should take those all away. Assessments, well, we just have to be really aware of how assessments distort teaching and the system, right? I mean, Dibbles, yeah, okay, it gives you some information. But if teachers are being judged based on their students' Dibble scores, and they know they can get their students' Dibble scores up by making them read faster and faster, that is completely fracturing the intended relationship between Dibbles and comprehension. Normally, if you're not being pushed to read faster and faster, you read faster because you're comprehending more. But if you're being pushed to read faster and faster, you read faster and comprehend less. So then it becomes an obstacle rather than a tool. Assessments that I really like for reading are these scenario-based integrative assessments where kids actually have to engage in a task that feels somewhat authentic. Like, here's a bunch of articles. Pick out the most important ones and summarize them for this newsletter. Right? Or here's a bunch of articles which disagree with one another. Decide which ones you agree with and make the argument in this letter to your principal, right? I mean, something that has a purpose to it, rather than just like read it and try to remember in what state bauxite is mined, which is something that it's picked as a comprehension item because nobody gives a shit what state bauxite is mined. Therefore, no kid has ever read about this, and therefore, of course, they have to read the text in order to get it. But that's not really what we want reading to be about. We want it to be about authentic tasks.
Thank you. All right. As we round out, let me just ask kind of more broadly, for those of us who are teacher educators, what else would you like to say to us in terms of preparing our teachers to teach reading?
I'm reminded of the person whose name I've now forgotten, who gave a commencement address this year to the graduates of some university and started her comments with, "You poor bastards." It's a very bad year for graduates. They don't have a lot to look forward to. General message to teacher educators: courage, strength. I think Celia said it in her introduction in a way that you're never going to be able to teach people everything they need to know, right? So instilling a learning approach, but also instilling a very healthy skepticism about claims of claims of knowledge or expertise from people who don't have a basis for such claims. Teachers, I'm actually kind of, I would say, I think teacher educators and teachers' lives would be much easier if we had a somewhat more guided system, right? If there were protocols, as there are in surgery or in other domains of the medical profession. Now, and you could say, well, that reduces autonomy, but it also increases effectiveness. And I think the trade-off between autonomy and effectiveness is we have to decide what the right balance point is there. But helping future teachers understand the domains in which they deserve autonomy and should express creativity, and the domains in which they should let themselves be guided by curricular supports, or be supported by curriculum and guided by convergent expertise in their communities. That one of the big challenges I see in the schools I work with is that 3 or 4 great teachers are doing 3 or 4 very different things. So the students don't have an experience of continuity. And in some schools where they are imposing approaches, professional development that I think is suboptimal. I mean, it could be, is slightly misguided, but at least all the teachers are getting it. And so they're all on the same page, right? And there's a lot to be said for teachers being able to, within a school community, being able to talk to each other about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I don't know, I think some good compromise is preparing teachers to be able to navigate that compromise between autonomy and inventiveness in the classroom, and participation in a larger community of distributed cognition that would make their work better.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Snow. I think that I speak for a lot of us. That was very engaging and sets a very good stage for doing the kinds of inter-teacher dialogue that we have planned for this afternoon. That's exactly the reason why the professors and lecturers here at Teacher Educators planned this afternoon's panels, is we began to have those conversations in our Teacher Education Policy Committee meeting, and we decided that why not take those conversations more publicly.